Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we're talking about swim baits and swim jigs, the differences, and when you should be throwing each style on your lake to catch more bass. So right out the gate, which one should you be throwing? It really comes down to getting to know your lake. If your bass are targeting small bait fish, shad, little minnows, things of that nature, if that's what you see running along the shore, if that's what you see bass spitting up when you catch them, then a swim bait is probably a better bet. If your bass are eating bluegill, panfish, larger shad, things of that nature, a swim jig is probably a better bet. Another rule of thumb that will help you make some quick decisions about which way to go is water clarity. If your water is crystal clear, I'm talking 10, 15, 20, 30 feet of visibility, then I will always start with a swim bait. Now again, that's a rule of thumb. Notice I say start. I will still try a swim jig, but I start with the swim bait. That's where my confidence lies. If your water's murkier, say chocolate milk up to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet of visibility, well then maybe start with the swim jig. If it's not working in that clearer end of that spectrum, then you lean towards the swim bait. But if it's totally dirty water, you're definitely throwing the swim jig. And if it's chocolate milk and they won't eat that, who knows, you might even go into a chatterbait or a spinnerbait. Now, that's just a couple quick rules of thumb for you. Another big factor is what's growing in the water. Do you have a lot of grass and vegetation? If the answer is no, you've got wide open rock banks, and the fish tend to just roam or sit in that rock, swim bait tends to be a better choice. If the answer is yes, you've got a lot of grass, big grass beds that come up, cover along the bank, maybe brush in the water, tules or reeds, a swim jig is definitely the better choice. So what I want to do with you today is run you through just a few of the basics on each side, a couple of things to try. So let's start with swim baits. We're going to end with swim jigs. This is a topic, both ends of that spectrum are a topic that I am so passionate about. I literally do not go out on the boat ever without one of those two tied on. Whether or not it's my main pattern or not, I've always got it with me. On the swim bait end, now we're talking smaller swim baits. We're not talking big trout imitating swim baits today. We're talking smaller swim baits on smaller heads to try and target some bass, to catch those fish. So there are a few different styles of head and a few different baits. I think anybody that wasn't financially motivated to say otherwise would say that anymore the Keitech is the king of small swim baits. It is undisputed king. They catch so many fish all over this country in so many different conditions. It's unbelievable. The fat swing impact, the larger style of the Keitech, it should be in every boat. It should be in every arsenal. If you go out and bass fish and that's not something you throw, you are missing an opportunity. So just know that going in. So I'm going to talk about the Keitech as the swim bait. Now, of course, you could sub in all sorts of different swim baits. There are hundreds of different companies making small swim baits, but this is the gold standard. So that's where I'm going to focus while I talk you through this. So on the swim bait end, this time of year and really year round, if you're going with that smaller swim bait, I recommend throwing it on an exposed jig head unless you truly can't get away with it. If you're up in the junk, up in the cover, then we go to a weedless swim bait head. And I won't take the time to show you 20 different hooks and riggings today because the swim bait is pretty simple. I will show you a couple, but down in the video description, I'll link you the exact gear. So a handful of different heads for different purposes. As an example, well, let's just stay focused for now. So the swim bait, let me rig one up for you. This is a 3.8 Keitech. This is a TacticalBassin Finesse swim bait head. They are made for each other. That is such a confidence bait for me when I've got clear water. I can go anywhere in this country. If there's better than, say, 6 or 7 feet of visibility, and anywhere, it'll work in 2 feet of visibility, 1 foot, 3 foot. But if I show up to a lake I've never been on and I can see I've got some clarity in the water, I'm right there. With either a 3.8, the size larger is a 4.3, which also fits beautifully on this head. Or I go larger to my head, the Matt Allen Swimbait head, with a 4.8 Keitech. But that Keitech on that exposed head, that is my confidence. If we show up on a lake, I see the clarity, I start right there because I can cover water quickly. And in my mind, it's a finesse approach. If you say finesse to one angler, they're thinking, hey, I need to throw a drop shot. I need to throw a tube. You say finesse to me, I'm thinking, I'm gonna tie on a Keitech on an exposed head and I'm gonna cover some water and see if there's some fish here. Because I know if they're there, 1, they're probably going to eat it. 2, even if they don't eat it, they're probably going to rise up to look at it. And in that clear water, I will see them and I'll know that I'm in the right area doing the right things and I can start adapting. So to adapt from there, because that is my bread and butter, that's my number one. One quick one for you, and actually here, before I do that, that's a 1/4 ounce head. This is something I want to explain about our tactical finesse head, because I think a lot of people miss this. We built this head to be the in-between. See, this is a guppy head. Now that's a true tiny little finesse head. Look at the difference, okay? But this is still a finesse head. It's way smaller than a Matt Allen head or a standard Swimbait head. Way smaller hook. I throw this really well on 8, 10, and 12 pound line. It's that perfect in between, and that's what we built it for. And most importantly, this is the 1/4 ounce. From the 1/8 to the 1/4, all the way up to the 1/2 ounce, it's the exact same hook. And I wanted you guys to see that. The hook never changes. It's designed for that 3.8 to 4.3 size bait, that in between. We built it to fit that niche where there really wasn't a proper head. That's what it's for. So it's the exact same hook, the exact same profile through all of the different sizes. You'll always maintain your profile. So the guppy head, here's one that I think is really overlooked. And I want to give you this quick tip before we transition to swim jigs. The guppy head is, wow, it's getting windy. Hopefully it's not horrible for you guys. Hopefully you can hear me clearly still. The guppy head is something we pair up with that 2.8 fat swing impact, that little Keitech, the 2.8, all the time. We throw it everywhere. We taught so many people how to throw it. Guys all over the country are catching fish on it. But one of the most overlooked baits by Keitech is this little guy, the Easy Shiner. The 4-inch Easy Shiner. It's such a small profile. Even though it says it's a 4-inch, look how slim it is. Right? I mean, it's so much smaller than a fat swing impact. This little guy on that tiny guppy head, the guppy head with a 1/0 hook, the smallest hook, set up just like that, is so deadly. And we don't talk about it that often. Specifically for smallmouth, it is unbelievable, but it works really well for largemouth too. If you're out there trying to get on that swimbait bite and it's not happening, you're throwing the things you normally throw, it's not happening, try an Easy Shiner. And the reason I say it's so finesse is because it has a different style of kick. So the fat swing impacts, they have this wide body, wide tail kick. It's a very aggressive kick. It draws fish way in. This little guy doesn't have that. It has this little twisting kick. It's a completely different action. It will not pull fish from as far, but you can go much, much slower. I mean, you can really slow it down. Paired with that little 1/0 hook, you can throw it on 5 and 6 pound line if you want to in crystal clear water. If there are bass in the water and they are willing to eat a bait fish, they are willing to eat that little tiny Easy Shiner. They love that thing. and we forget to talk about it a lot because for us, it's a niche. On our home lake, we throw the bigger stuff all the time. But when I get out and start traveling, like today, this is what I'm throwing. So, enough on that. 2 more heads, just a quick thought. In between the Swimbait and the swim jig is bladed heads, underspins, and screw heads. When you just need a tiny bit more flash, but you still don't want that big bulk, go to a bladed head. If the bass are actively on bait fish, you can see a school of bait fish and there's bass eating them. A bladed head with a little bit of flash will stomp a plain swim bait and it will stomp a swim jig. It will outfish both of them. There is no question. Okay, with that, we round it out on the swim bait. Let's turn our attention to swim jig. So what's the deal? Why do we throw these things? What are they superior for? What is their purpose? I want you to think of them as a finesse chatterbait or spinnerbait, okay? So if your fish are super aggressive and they want to chase and they want that vibration and that flash, if it's muddy water, you'll throw a spinnerbait and a chatterbait. But if they don't want to eat that, or maybe your water's been murky and it's starting to clear so that bite's shutting down, a swim jig is so good. This is one of my favorite categories and I don't think it gets enough attention. We do a lot of it. Actually, the first bait that I ever designed was a swim jig with dirty jigs. It's this one, a California swim jig, and we did it, I don't know, like 10 or 12 years ago. That's how long ago we've been passionate about this topic. So with swim jigs, just like with the swim bait, it runs the entire gamut. There are little finesse swim jigs all the way up to great big power fishing swim jigs, and they have different purposes. So I'm going to break it down to 3. Okay, I'm going to give you 3, and I'm going to give you 3 trailers, and it's really that simple. After that, it's just color. And for color, you're going to match what you already do. So if you know that your bass are chasing bluegill, you'll go to something like an Alabama brim or a bluegill to get that bluegill profile. If you know they're chasing shad, you go to a tactical shad or something like that to get that profile. And then if you normally throw, you know, a chartreuse and white spinnerbait, you might as well go to a citrus shad or a dirty shad or something like that to get that color and profile that you're used to getting. So the big difference with swim jigs, one, you need different action than you do with a swim bait. It's critical. That is the most important thing. More than color, more than anything, is action. And where you get the action from is the swim bait trailer. That is the most important thing, and it's where everybody blows it. Man, this wind really is getting rough. Sorry about that, guys. I didn't expect that to kick up. So with swim jigs, trailer is key, and it changes with each style of swim jig. So here's the 3 styles that we're going to focus in on. The first is a finesse swim jig, and these are all dirty jigs. That's the swim jig that I throw, that I have the confidence in, that I've been throwing forever. You can take this information and apply it to any brand, okay? But down in the video description, I'll link you the exact baits that we throw, the exact colors that we choose and why, and then also the exact trailers that we pair them up with. And then you can take that information and do with it what you will. So the smallest is a finesse swim jig. It's a lighter wire hook, okay? Very light wire hook, perfect for that, again, 8, 10, 12 pound line. Much lighter than you would think for a swim jig. It's a much thinner skirt. They actually take the entire interior of the skirt and cut it out. So it's half the strands of a standard swim jig. So it puffs up really well, but it's very loose, very free-flowing, smaller hook, lighter weed guard. Those are all important things. Then you have what we would consider a standard swim jig, which is a full skirt, stronger weed guard, and a full-size hook. And then we have the big swim jigs. There's actually 2 versions. The one that I throw is the California swim jig, and this is the one we designed years ago. It was the first heavy wire swim jig to ever hit the market. When we got into swim jig fishing, the heaviest thing you could get was a standard swim jig. And we were bending them out. We were on the California Delta, and we were bending those things out left and right on giant fish. We knew there had to be something else. So we actually designed this together. Kurt from Dirty Jigs built it. The California swim jig is what we called it way back then. And it is a gaff of a hook. I mean, you cannot torque this thing. That's why it's called a no jack hook. You can't jack that hook. So that guy is what we designed. And again, it was the very first one. It's designed for giant fish, heavy cover. And in a minute, I'll explain exactly how we fish it. It's also great for stripers and other predators too. Now you can also get it now, fast forward a few years, in a standard swim jig style head, but it still has that no jack hook. So a standard swim jig head versus the head that we originally designed. I still throw the original, and I'll explain why, but it's not right for everybody. So with those different styles, you need different swim baits. The swim bait is everything. A Keitech. Again, possibly the greatest swim bait ever made. Great big wide kick. Not a lot of body rock at all. In my opinion, it is not the right swim bait for a swim jig. It's not. Now, I admit, I throw it all the time. And if you look closely in our videos, you'll see me catching fish on it. It catches fish. Any swim bait on a swim jig will catch fish under some circumstances. So a lot of times, if the bite's wide open, I do it out of pure laziness. Because I always have keitechs in my boat, because that's always where I start when I'm throwing that little swim bait. So it's easy for me to just grab one and go. Or if I realize I'm on a swim jig bite, but I don't have all my stuff, I can just pull out a keitech and start catching fish. So you'll actually see me throw it a lot, even as I tell you that it's not right. It will still work. But if you want to maximize your time with a swim jig, you're not looking for that big wide kick. You're looking for a more rigid swim bait, something that's tougher. It's made of a tougher plastic. And when you get that tougher plastic, you tend to get a lot more body roll. They get a lot more aggressive this way, not just in the back. And that rolling is what you want in a swim jig. So the two that I found that work the best are a D-Walker, a River to Sea D-Walker, and a X-Zone Swammer. And I'm sure there are others. I'm not saying I've tried every single swim bait out there, although I've tried most of them, but I'm sure one or two have slipped through the cracks. But both of these guys are tough material, and they get a ton of roll. That Swammer, I mean, giant side-to-side roll. If you put it on just a bare swim bait head, and you see that hook in the water, the hook is literally doing this as it's coming through the water. The D-Walker has got just this unbelievable hunt. That tail's back there throbbing so hard that the bait's rolling, but it's also going up and down, and the head is swimming side to side. It's the craziest thing. This bait with that exposed hook is unbelievable. That is my favorite swim jig trailer by far. So, again, what you want is that aggressive motion. The reason why is that if you take just a regular old run-of-the-mill swim bait, doesn't matter what, right? Just go get it out of a dollar bin, and you put it on a swim jig, and it comes through the water, and the tail's back there with a little bit of kick, and it's just coming through the water. That's all it's doing. Fish will eat it. It will work, but it's just this coming through the water with a little kick in the back, okay? If you figure out how to pair them properly, and here is my recommendation for proper. For the Finesse swim bait, I love that little Swammer, okay? I love it for that. See how well that pairs up? That's an untrimmed skirt. Everything is stock here. When that thing starts rocking and rolling, coming through the water, your skirt is no longer stuck to that bait. It puffs up. What that skirt does for you, When it puffs up like that, well, it imitates a larger bait fish, a panfish, a bluegill, a larger profiled shad. It's got a bigger body, right? It puffs out, it's wider all the way around. It's a bigger profile, and that skirt will flow. And you're not doing anything. You don't have to do the rod shake while you reel. If you pair up the right trailer, you can eliminate all that. You just chuck and wind. Chuck and wind. Mindless fishing. Because down there on its own, you've got a great swim bait trailer action, but in addition to that, you've got that skirt pulsating and flowing and moving and creating that secondary action. And secondary action, I cannot believe we're 20 minutes into this video before I said that phrase the first time, is the deal. What a swim bait lacks that a swim jig has is secondary action. So a swim bait has a tail kick and a great profile. And in clear water, it's beautiful and bass will just come get it. But if those bass are picky, if they're finicky, if they like that larger profile, you need that swim jig. And what secondary action does is it imitates everything that a swim bait can't. You still have primary action. You still have tail kick. That's primary. But when that skirt starts going and you've got the movement and the glitter in that skirt starts flashing and throwing light as it's moving, that imitates scales throwing light on the fish. As it's moving through the water, there's light flashing. It imitates gill plates moving. It imitates all that stuff, fins moving on that fish. Everything that a swim bait can't, that primary action can't, that trailer can do with secondary action. So it will fool giant fish over and over and over again. It can fool them. It has fooled them. It can fool them for you. So again, the Finesse version, I like that little swammer, that 3.5-inch size swammer is dynamite for really getting that guy rocking and rolling and moving. For the standard swim jig, I like the smaller size of the D-Walker. Again, that D-Walker is so aggressive. It just puffs that bait up and gets it moving. Back 10 years ago when we were doing videos about swim jigs, that's crazy to say out loud. 10 years ago, we used to throw a robo-worm bait that did something very, very similar, but that bait has been discontinued for so many years. I was so excited when I figured out that this trailer would do something so similar and actually does it with even more head rock and roll. That is what you need in a swim jig trailer. So again, the smaller size pairs up beautifully with a standard swim jig. And then that largest D-Walker pairs up great on those full body, full profile, a no-jack swim jig, the California swim jig. And I want to spend a minute and explain this California to you, because when guys throw a swim jig, we haven't even got around to that, you're typically throwing it around shallow cover. Not all the time, but typically that's where people like to throw it. They'll throw it right up on grass edges, bump it through the reeds. There's so many things you can do with it because it's weedless. In the early spring, when everything's getting flooded, well, I say early spring, this year's been crazy in parts of this country. They're still flooded, so you can do it right now. When those bass are dirt shallow and everything's flooded, you can throw a swim jig up in an inch of water. Because with that weed guard, it's going to come through without hanging up. When you fish that shallow, the worst thing you can do is throw something up there that gets snagged. Because when you go to get your bait, you'll scare all the fish out of those shallows. They're really sensitive in that shallow water. They don't like your presence coming in there. So a swim jig is about the best thing you could ever throw because it'll just go through anything. I mean, you can throw it right over the top of tules. You can throw it out of sight, start reeling. It'll just walk and hunt its way through there and go find the fish for you. It's unbelievable. What I do with a California swim jig is a little different than every other swim jig. And I want to make sure you guys know the difference. So a standard swim jig, again, see that round pointed head. Its purpose is to split cover. What I mean by that is if you've got grass growing up in the water and you're running a swim jig and there's two strands of grass and that swim jig comes along and hits between them, it's a natural wedge and it'll open that grass up and let that swim jig go right through and on it goes. So it's extremely weedless and it'll go anywhere. It's a 4x4 of swim baits. The California swim jig, we throw it in the big sizes. Now, they make it in smaller sizes, and sometimes I use that, but the half and the 3/4 are my favorites. And I do the exact opposite with them. Now, that face will still split cover. It will still come through, but it hangs up more than a standard swim jig on the grass. It'll catch on that grass, and that is what I want. See, when I'm out on the lake, and I'm on a lake where a lot of people throw a swim jig, guys are throwing through the lanes in the grass. They aim for the open spots, and they'll fish it right through the open, right between the grass clumps. That's what everyone does. You do that with every bait, right? Whether you're throwing a crankbait, a buzz bait, a swim jig, anything, if there's lanes in the grass, you fish the lanes. Well, bass get conditioned to that. So I take that larger, that 3/4 ounce is my favorite for it, with that big trailer, big profile all the way around. And instead of aiming down the lane between the two grass clumps, I aim right over the top of the grass. And I fish that bait, and I just swim it like that grass isn't there. And that grass clump's there, and I'm coming in, my line's rubbing, and then it hits the grass and it sticks. So most people want to swim right past the grass. I don't. I aim for the grass, and I hang that bait up, and then I rip that rod to clean it. You blow it through. You cannot believe how many fish have become conditioned to people fishing the lanes around the grass. Now, I'm not saying you won't catch fish. Obviously, you'll catch fish. But those big fish, the wary fish, they become conditioned to that. And if a lot of guys are out there doing it, those fish pull right into the heart of that grass, so they don't even have to see that stuff going by. When you come right into the heart of the grass and start busting it open, they come unglued, because nothing else does that. You can't do it with any other bait. You can't even do it with a standard swim jig because they're not heavy enough. 3/4 ounce has enough mass that as you're coming down behind that grass, it's not lifting right to the surface and hopping over it. It comes in and sticks, and you actually blow it through. It's a different action, it's a different look, and it's a big profile, and it catches giant fish. That is why that bait is so special to me. So, swim baits and swim jigs. Again, just the bare bones basics. The clearer the water, start with a swim bait. The murkier the water, start with a swim jig. If they're chasing little bait, throw a swim bait. If they're chasing bigger bait, throw a swim jig. That's the basics. That's where you want to begin. As far as the size of the swim jig or the size of the swim bait, you focus on how large the fish are and how large their food is. Even if they're big fish, if their food is little tiny, I'll start with that Finesse swim bait or that Finesse swim jig, and I just know that I need to be careful fighting those fish back to the boat. Don't horse them. But if I can get away with bigger, I always do, because I'm trying to catch that biggest fish all the time. And then again, on the swim bait end, if I could only have one, fat swing impact on a 1/2 ounce head is really where I would go. A 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce head to go anywhere in the country. But if you want to downsize and you want something a little different than that 2.8 that we throw all the time, that 4-inch easy shiner rocks. I mean, they come so far to eat that thing. It's awesome. And they eat it when they just won't eat other things. They come up and they just track it. And you're thinking, that fish will never eat. You can see them coming. That fish will never eat. And they swim behind that bait, and then they just eat it. It's unbelievable how well it works. So guys, get out there this summer and the rest of this year. Throw these baits. Whether it's a swim bait or a swim jig, both are an amazing way to cover water, pull up big fish, catch fish, show you fish that you don't normally see. And again, covering water allows you to present to more fish. You can do it faster than going down a bank throwing a worm or something else. So it really allows you to cover that water and find those fish quickly. Down in the video description, I know that was a ton of gear. I will link the exact baits, the exact heads, the swim jigs, the sizes, the heads, the colors that we have confidence in, as well as rods and reels, because I didn't even get to that. I'll give you a couple of my favorite rods for throwing this stuff at different price points. because that does matter as well. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.